Okay, this is my testimony from the occult to Christ. So I'm just gonna hop right into it. It started a day like any other day, and I was scrolling on the YouTube and I came across this video. Basically, I started watching this testimony video of this woman who left astrology, and she was doing all of these occult practices. And the one thing that really caught my attention was this word idolatry, and how we, as a culture, we idolize certain things. And it's different for many of us, whether that's money or sex or like actual idols that are like other lesser gods, which are common in a lot of other religions. And so as I was watching this, I was looking at my big, massive bookshelf in front of me. Now, I hadn't had a TV in like years and years and years, and the centerpiece of my living room was always my big, massive occult book collection, which I'm staring at this as you know, they're talking about idolatry and thinking about how like, wow, I have really held my book collection as an idol. I've been like more of a minimalistic person for a really long time, but this book collection I've been carrying around for years and years and years and years. And so much so that it's literally the center point, like the focal point of my living room. And though there were some, you know, some Christian books on that bookshelf, it was, the majority was occult reference books on like witchcraft, astrology, psychic development, Rosicrucianism, which was like a topic that I got really interested in, which was kind of like the doorway into a lot of this when I was like 18, 19 years old. I would collect those books that were from like the early 1900s. And so all that to say, I was staring at this book collection, and like my desk, my little writing area was right beside that. And as a writer, and I tend to have a bit more of like an experimental, I guess, approach to life. Like that's one of the things that really gets me excited, of like, you know, trying these little experiments. And so I kind of was thinking like, hey, I wonder just like how much all of these books and all of this written content is influencing my writing, for better or worse, like how just all of that text is kind of like through osmosis infiltrating my inspiration, and like who would I be as a writer? What new type of content could I essentially write if that wasn't in my immediate space? And so it started off honestly as like an experiment, and I'm like, I'm just gonna take all of these books off the shelf and put them in storage. And I did that pretty much like immediately, like within the first like hour or two of watching this video, and then watching a bunch of other kind of come to Jesus testimonies from young women who had been in the occult. And so that's kind of how this all started on November 4th. So it started with this one initial video, and then basically all day I just was watching all of these, New Age to Jesus testimony videos from women who were in a very similar industry that I was in, which was the, you know, online spiritual coaching world. And so this is kind of like an offshoot of the personal development world, and essentially it's like these very high level coaches who are teaching, you know, all these like downloads and codes, and using astrology and numerology and human design, and, you know, all of these different types of modalities to help you ascend or evolve. And I was doing the same thing. And that was one of my like programs, was like Ascension sessions. That was something like I really believed in. We are here to help humanity and the collective ascend and kind of break through these, you know, limitations, kind of break through the matrix essentially. When you're really in the occult and in the new age, and people who are out of it that are like asking questions, and they're trying to add up what you're saying, and a lot of people will just look at you really blankly, like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's because it doesn't actually make sense. Like, you can't actually answer all of these questions. The answer is just always like, well, it's for ascension, it's for expansion, it's to help humanity, you know, get to the next level. We're in the age of Aquarius, like all of these very esoteric sounding things. but that there's no solid foundation to it. And that's what I'm going to be, consistently getting to in this testimony, as well as any other future videos that I make, is that the New Age and the occult and the esoteric is literally just a mishmash of all of these different religions and ways of thinking that have no solid foundation. And so what happened, after like watching all of these videos, all of the dots started connecting, and there was already a lot of red flags that were coming up in my mind for probably about 8 months before this, through being in the spiritual coaching industry. And like the one big one that was just really pressing on me for, like I said, like around 8 months or so leading up to this, was this like total self-absorption of those of us who were in that world, by which I mean the endless shadow work, the endless manifestation for what we want, like the whole spiritual culture and like manifesting and all of these things. It is completely about the self, right? Like, and it starts off really good sounding, like self-love and self-care, but it's literally all about the self. And I just couldn't deny that I was starting to feel like this doesn't feel healthy. Like there is this like self-obsession and just this constant inward looking that I'm like, something feels icky about this. Like something is starting to feel really off about this. And it just felt like this sort of hamster wheel that never stopped. And I could see that in all of the women that I was working with, in all of the, women that I saw gravitating toward these spiritual coaches, like the never ending readings. And again, I couldn't deny that I was doing the same thing. Like every single night, basically, I would watch like tarot videos on YouTube, and it becomes addicting. And it's kind of this thing that it's hard to get out of, because then like the algorithm, that's all you see on your YouTube feed now. So also in this industry, there is a lot of pay to play, essentially. So in this spiritual coaching world, there's always this next level money to make. Like it's so twisted how like the money piece and this constantly like, you should raise your prices and charge more. But it's like this whole industry that is charging an exorbitant amount of money for their spiritual gifts and to share their spiritual gifts, like insane amounts of money. And so I was also starting to connect the dots between like, why does the spiritual coaching industry feel a lot like an MLM, like a pyramid scheme, like a network marketing? And so anyone who has done network marketing, and then it's like you get out of it, and I only did it for like a bit amount of time because I was awful at it. You realize how like, oh, there's just kind of like a few people at the top that are kind of making the money off all of the people. And it just really started to feel that way. And so the way that it was like, all this money stuff was linked with essentially your salvation, right? Because then people would be so drawn to these certain coaches, and it would be like this program after this program after this program. And as somebody who was learning a lot about like the business side of like running a spiritual business, I was like seeing all these different layers, and I just couldn't deny of like how manipulative it kind of was starting to feel. And I don't think it's necessarily consciously at all. It's that you're so programmed that like, you have these certain like gurus, like spiritual business gurus that you're following, and they're charging so much money for like, to do like one-on-one or their mastermind or their big group coaching. And it's like literally each spiritual coach has their own pyramid scheme. And then you find out that they're paying their coach like 6 figures like to work with them, which is just actually insane when you think about you're paying to learn these spiritual codes. It's like so culty now that I'm removed from it. And then what really, was kind of like the house of cards fell was when, I was working with someone who was kind of, sharing, like teaching people how to make a certain amount of money, like a high certain amount of money every month through doing, some sort of spiritual coaching, but then they weren't able to pay me. And so this is in no way throwing shade. Like I've been through, I was definitely that person at other times in my life where I was falling behind on bills or not able to pay a coach. And it's like, I was starting to see how, because I had been in that situation and then I was experiencing it with somebody else too, it was like, oh, this is a very like unseen, I guess, reality of this industry. And like, I'm so grateful for that experience now, because it really was the thing that snapped me out of the illusion that is Instagram and the illusion that is this spiritual coaching industry. Because I was like, if this is going on in my like relatively very small little sphere of the spiritual coaching world, where it's like, yeah, people are paying, playing around with like, 10, 20K, 5, 10, 20K kind of like investments. And this is what's going on. And then I was like, whoa, kind of like zooming over here with these spiritual coaches who are talking about investing like $100,000 to work with a coach and like on these like bigger scales, right? And I'm like, how many of these people are actually not paying their coaches? Like if this is happening in my little world, how much of this is just an illusion? And all of these other women that are saying like, you can make this much money and you just have to work with me and I'll do your chart, and like all of these things are not actually being paid. And so it really, like, we already know that like Instagram and social media is an illusion and it's kind of a highlight reel, but this really kind of broke it in the inside for me and really shattered the illusion that what else are people hiding? Because it was like, then I was still seeing these people who are really struggling financially, unable to pay to work with their coaches, still trying to teach that they could help people earn, 10K months or 20K months or whatever that was. And so it was just like, they're like, you're saying one thing, but then doing another thing. But it's like, I don't blame you, because this whole culture is set up this way. And so that really made me sort of look at what this culture was representing and how much of it is literally built on sand. And so this is one of the things that Jesus is very clear about in the Bible, is like, a fool builds his home on the sand. A wise man builds it on a strong foundation. And the spiritual online coaching community is literally sand. It will just disintegrate underneath you. It went away so fast. And I'm so grateful that, like, cause I always wondered, like, why am I not getting ahead? Like, I would definitely have a few clients here or there, but it was always like feast or famine. It would be like one client, then they'd pay in full and I'd be like, oh, thank God. But then it would be like nothing. And it would just be like this constant trying to like put yourself out there online and just not really getting the consistency of fruit that someone needs to, survive. And this is where it like always felt like I was missing something, and I was almost addicted to, well, I should learn from this coach and they seem to really have it figured out and they're talking about all this money that they make. I was being sold this illusion that I could just make all of this money from my spiritual gifts, and it didn't really happen. It was like breadcrumbs. It was enough to keep me in the trance of like, oh, there's just one thing I'm missing. Like, I'm just about to figure it out. Like, it's just about to happen. So it was like this breadcrumbs, but it was never enough to actually fully sustain me. Like a toxic relationship where like, and it's so funny because so many women in this industry talk about relationships and like how to get a conscious man and, stop dating men who are just giving you breadcrumbs. And I'm like, this community is literally just feeding us breadcrumbs. And so though some people, like I've watched, many testimonies of women who were in like the similar industry and they were like making 6 figures and doing really well. And so to walk away from that, I think required a lot more. Whereas mine, I'm almost so grateful that I never really made that much money because it was much easier to walk away. That's the ranty part of the spiritual online coaching community that really preys on women. And that's why like this is the first scripture that was like, boom, like really woke me up. So I'm going to read this to you. So this is from 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1-7. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty. And here's the part that we really get into this community. Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. And from such people turn away. For this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. That was the scripture that like everything just crumbled. Every single woman in my life who is in that world, which was literally every woman in my life, it's exactly that. Always learning, but never able to come to the knowledge of truth. It is the never-ending hamster wheel. It is the constant seeking of like, you know, learning about this part of astrology and that part of astrology and this part of human design and this part of numerology, and like it never, ever, ever ends. Always pursuing, you know, vain philosophies and never coming to the knowledge of truth, never coming to a landing place of this is truth, because it keeps going. And this is the main flaw with the New Age philosophy, even like the Eastern philosophies, and this like mishmash mosaic of all of these mixed parts, is that if things keep going, this never-ending expansion of consciousness, that means like the story can always change, that there is no finish line. And this is also what we see with the idea of reincarnation, and how spiritually and mentally and emotionally exhausting that belief is, because there is no finish line. You just keep coming back and you keep coming back and you keep coming back. The part that I want to talk about right now is this, you know, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. You know, one of the things that I was into, and a lot of these women are into, and it's not even behind closed doors, like people are publicly coaching about this. And so, you know, and there's one specific coach that a lot of people were drawn to, and, you know, she talks a lot about like sex magic and business. And so sex magic is essentially using your orgasmic power to manifest and get whatever you want. I was kind of starting to learn about this, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And this is more of like an occultist practice. And the idea is how you kind of get invited into this idea is like, well, if, you know, 2 people having sex creates a baby, like creates life, then that same orgasmic power we can use independently or together to manifest or create whatever we want. So that's the, you know, philosophy or theory around that. And so what we see in this coaching industry, the spiritual coaching industry, is women selling courses on how to masturbate, doing sex magic with yourself, to manifest clients and money and men and houses and literally whatever you want. Having a form of godliness, but denying its power. So, you know, one coach in particular that a lot of us were following, you know, this really made me think of her and this world, because the idea of God is preached. And, you know, for anyone who has read David Dida, you know, the Way of the Superior Man and Dear Lover, you know, those books and his content they're kind of like a staple in the conscious relationship sphere, which is kind of like another category of all of this. And one of the things he writes about, which is where a lot of these other coaches get this idea from, is like having sex to experience God, which, yeah, biblically, that's a way that like 2 become one flesh. But the way that this is sold and communicated in the conscious relationship and spiritual communities, you don't have to be married. You can have this with anybody. And it's done in the name of God. And so this is where like Satan is crafty. He is not creative. So he doesn't create anything new. He literally takes what is pure and holy of God and he reverses it. And so this is how we're seeing this in this culture is people And, you know, women, mostly the high majority of women, I would say, are into this stuff. That's why the scripture is like so, it just gets straight to the point. It's like gullible women who are led astray. And whereas I think because we are so much more emotional than men, where men are much more like logical and rational and like, thank the Lord for that, right? We're literally buying sin. And so that's one of the things that I couldn't unsee. And so one of the other scriptures that's really important is that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. And so this is like the branding that we see of the online spiritual community. It's all these like very beautiful women and like, you know, this like light, airy sort of like clothing, and just like, you know, I can't not think about Rebecca Campbell book that just like blew up, Light is the New Black, and the Rise Sister Rise book. Those books I read at the same time, and that I think those two were really sort of initiations into this cult, essentially, of these like Lightworkers. But it's like, that's not of like the biblical God. And so one of the things that like really connected to me was this idea that we're always, you know, in this kind of culture, people are like, they pray, right? They do like ceremonies and rituals and all these things, and there's generally a prayer, but it's like you call on your angels and your guides, right? Like that's a very common thing to call on in any type of spiritual work that you're doing in that world. And the reality is, like, I think we just have this belief in that world that like, oh, angels and guides are good, like spirit guides are good. And it's like, says who? The guru or coach that you're following? Like, no. The one thing that connected to me was like, we are so naive if that's what we think. Like, demons and fallen angels have been studying humanity and humankind for thousands of years. To think that we can outsmart them or just be like, oh, I'm gonna call on my spirit guides and that like makes them good. It's like, no, that makes us easier to control. Now we have this whole like spiritual army around us of like guides, and it's like, is not good. And so this is why, like, you know, when I was still very much in that world, and I would hear like, even that like, no, tarot cards are so bad, like, or anything, it's just like, that's a doorway. And I'd be like, it's pieces of cardboard. Like, what are you afraid of? Like, and I would make all of these justifications of like, no, it's just a way to, you know, connect with your subconscious, and we're all knowing and all the answers are inside of us anyway. Like, it's like, we could look at this scientifically. And now I can see how, no, these little bits and pieces truly are doorways. Because the fact that like I started doing tarot, and then like only a few years later, I'm into like sex magic and worshiping other gods. Like, did I ever have any Jesus statues around my house? No. But like I had I think Shiva. I had like a Kuan Yin and a Shiva or something. And it's like, do I really know anything about them? No. And so that's just kind of about that. So let's see what other scriptures I have here. During this whole November 4th day of saving awakening, like true awakening, not like the spiritual awakening that we reference to in the New Age, but like truly like the scales falling from my eyes, was this video on the law of attraction. So again, like another New Age, you know, spiritual coach coming to Christianity, and her speaking on the law of attraction. And I was like, whoa, this is so interesting, because like I loved Abraham Hicks. Like I literally, like almost every single morning I would put on Abraham Hicks because it would get me in the vibe. It would make me feel like really inspired. The main book that Abraham teaches from, and that I had read years before, was Ask and It Is Given. And so what we have to look at, this is actually a Bible verse, but it's cherry picked. This is the thing that Abraham Hicks never talks about. They just talk about all the time that ask for whatever you want and it's given, and you just have to get yourself in the right vibe. They cherry pick that verse, and they never talk about what Jesus said before or what Jesus said after. Now that phrase comes from Matthew, and it's from Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, which is like his main teaching. It's one of the most famous, like, you know, times of his ministry in the Bible. And then so on this same night, so I'm like realizing that like, oh, this is just cherry picked. Like, we're not actually looking at all these other parts in the Bible. And this one really important thing is, why will these spiritual teachers cherry pick verses from the Bible, but never tell you to go read the Bible? They give you enough to be like, oh, it's in the Bible, it's okay. But read all these other books to get what you're actually looking for. And that was like the connection when, you know, I had been like looking at all of my books and realizing like, and I had a Bible and like some, you know, parts are like highlighted, and it's not that I didn't ever read it, but I was cherry picking certain verses and I was looking to the Bible to try and find permission to do the magic I was doing. So now we're getting into like, it's probably like 10 o'clock at night. It's gone dark. All the books are off my bookshelf and I'm sitting at my desk and I'm just like reading the Bible. I'm reading all these scriptures that I'm led to on this day of like, you know, the gullible women, Satan disguising himself as an angel of light, and all of these things that are like, whoa, like the whole Instagram spiritual coaching world is like shattering and all of the dots are connecting like super quick. And so then this was like the climax of the evening when it actually became a supernatural sort of experience, because up until then it was a very intellectual learning approach to reading the Bible, which was super interesting to me because I was always believed that like, no, God is an experience. Like, you can't intellectually get to God or Jesus. Like, it has to be an experience. And I honestly feel like I was totally wrong, and I want to take that away because I think it can potentially be different for everyone. And I think because I was essentially putting God in a box, being like, no, it's going to be an experience, where the way that I was actually led fully to Jesus and God, like God of the Bible, was to read the Bible in an intellectual sort of way. And so, but in this, you know, day that I was saved, this is the more like experiential sort of part. So I'm sitting at my desk, I'm reading the Bible, and then I'm led to where Satan tempts Jesus in the desert. And so I'll read this section to you, and then I'll tell you kind of like how this all connects. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now when the tempter came to him, he said, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread." But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "It is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." Again the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. What we see here is that Satan is using scripture against Jesus. Well, trying to. He's manipulating what God actually said. And this was where I was like, whoa, this totally resonates with the law of attraction. And especially the line of like, again, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and said to him, "All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." And what does the law of attraction promise us? That you can have whatever you want if you bow down and worship him. So then this is the other connection where we actually kind of get into politics and left versus right a little bit, because what the law of attraction teaches and manifestation is that our feelings basically are God. Like, our feelings tell us what to do. And so we want to, like, you know, we always want to do what feels good. The thing is, like, Satan always uses truth to tempt us, right? It's like, if it wasn't appealing, if it didn't initiate some sort of truth, there would be no reason we would go down that road. And so there is a lot of truth in this culture, but it's that, like, the truth starts to get distorted, and then you don't know what is truth and what is not. like I said, Satan is crafty, he's not creative. And so there's always this reversal of God's truth. And those are the things that we need to look out for. But we don't actually know what to look out for unless we're reading the Bible. One of the things that we really see, for example, like in the left culture compared to the right in this culture that we're living in today, is that there is no room for facts. Like, feelings are essentially making new laws, and human rights are now based on our feelings, and that those feelings can change on any given day. That's also what we see that is mirrored in the New Age. It's all based on how we feel, but that's not truth. And so this whole ideology that is being pushed and taught in our culture is that, you know, there's your truth and there's my truth, and there's his truth and there's her truth, and like everyone has their own truth. No, that is called perspective. There has to be a truth, or else our whole reality is built on sand. And so that's what our culture has moved so far away from, is that there is nothing built on a solid foundation. There is nothing built on solid rock except for the Bible. This is why any kind of show you watch nowadays, anything in our modern mainstream culture will point you away from the Bible. So this also then, leads me back to one of the other things that was kind of going on around this November 4th period for me last year, was this image that popped up of Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly, their Halloween costumes. And it was basically him as a priest and her as this like sex kitten. I think she was like on a leash even. And it was basically this completely blasphemous Halloween costume, completely sexualizing what is sacred. And obviously like blasted on mainstream culture. But what that did would show me how far we've gone into this like satanic agenda and corrupting what is sacred, and this like reversal and sexualizing what is so pure. And I think one of the main things about that, you know, image specifically was that the left has made this whole big campaign around cultural appropriation. You know, I remember a few years back, people were, you know, getting in trouble for wearing like, you know, native headdresses to Coachella and like things like that. It's like, we're not allowed to do that. But yet, cultural appropriation for Christianity and completely perverting that culture and community is like blasted. That's what was really like convicting for me, is this mainstream reality, this mainstream sort of matrix, if you will, is never pointing us to read the Bible. And what we're seeing, and especially like with this, like so many people kind of getting saved out of the New Age is, and this is where I do think it is very, as much as all of that is satanic, it's like, we all know in the end God wins. And why is he sort of like allowing this to happen? And I think it's like the volume is being really turned up on these two sides, so that like we have no choice but to either fall on one or the other side. It is said that like not to be lukewarm, like God would rather us like freezing cold or hot, like he will spit us out if we are lukewarm. And so what we're seeing in culture today is like there is no room for lukewarm Christianity. Okay, so I'm sitting at my desk. This is like the climax of November 4th, as all of the pieces are coming together. I'm reading how Satan tempts Jesus in the Bible, and, you know, all of these pieces are coming together here in front of me, and how Satan will cherry pick certain verses, you know, get his hook into us and like keep hold of us, and then being able to manipulate the truth. And so as soon as I finish reading this, the power goes out of my whole house, and then a windstorm starts. Like, immediately the power goes out, this whole, like I can hear the wind circling my house and garbage cans are flying down, and then it comes back on. And I'm like, okay, this is real. Like this is like something is actually happening right now. And then it happens again, like 2 minutes later, goes off, all of the wind comes back on. And so that was kind of the experiential part that I was like, oh, this is real. Like this is actually happening right now. Like I am onto something. By this point, all of the books had been taken off the shelf. All of the dots were connecting. The house of cards like had fallen down. Everything was just like disintegrating. And this was the climax. That was the day, like all of the pieces came together. And then the next morning, I remember I was driving, and I was kind of on this, like, it was so wild because I was just like, whoa, like this is like a whole new life. And I was driving and I was listening to another testimony, this girl saying like, you know, Jesus just thinks thinks we're rubies. Like, he just thinks we're like, we are just this, you know, the jewel of his eye type thing. And I look up and the license plate right in front of me says Ruby. It was just kind of thing after thing like that. It's like not asking for any signs, but them just showing up. And it was just so convicting listening to all these other women talk about the same life I was living, in that very sinful nature, in the occult, living in sexual sin, like just all of these things. And then what resonated with them to take them out of that. And that was like the thing that really connected for me, because it wasn't for a lack of trying. Like, I'd been dating a minister for the 2 years prior to this. And it was like really like trying to figure out what was this missing piece. And honestly, what it was, he just didn't fully speak my language. So there was this language barrier between us. And so what happened when I started to listen to all these other women who were in that world speak about how they got from A to B, it just took someone who spoke my language to give me the part that I was missing. I skipped the part where the following day I got rid of all of my books, like hundreds of books, like got rid of like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of like all these books, all of my cards, all of my crystals, all of my jewelry that I had, you know, infused with like occult energy, anything esoteric, like it was gone. We tried burning as many books as we could, not realizing like burning books actually takes a really long time. I think we burned like 20 and it took like 2 to 3 hours. And then finally after that, because this was the next day, because there was like all of these like intense nightmares that happened. Once I like took the books, they were like below my bedroom in this storage room. So they were already off the shelf. And then like the second day, they were downstairs in the storage room, like underneath my bed. And there was like intense nightmares, like for like all night. And then waking up and like having my boyfriend there to, you know, like just have me say the name of Jesus over and over and over again and just like pray with me throughout the night. And because of that night, it was like, this is like the spiritual warfare that they talk about. Like, this is clearly there is some demonic stuff in all of this stuff, because it does not want to leave my house. And like some of the dreams were like my house talking back to me, which was really intense because I had gotten really into communicating with like the spirit of my home and feeling like I couldn't leave my home in a sense, like move, even though I'd wanted to move for a long time. It was like something was keeping me there. And so having these like really intense dreams where the house was speaking back to me, really crazy stuff. And so after that, I realized like, oh no, this stuff has to go. Like, there is some stuff that like doesn't want to leave, and it's like proving that to me, which means it has to go. So the next day, yeah, we like packed up all of my books in the car, all of this stuff, and yeah, burned about like 20 of them. And then like it started raining, so then it was so much harder to burn. Yeah, I was just like, I'm done with this. Like, let's just go find a dumpster to get rid of this. Like, I'm not going to spend the next couple of weeks like burning it all and like having to just be, it's like I've literally been in this, I've been in the occult my whole life. I haven't even, I realize I'm almost at an hour and I haven't even got into how I got into the occult and how I've been in that in my whole life. But I really wanted to keep this video succinct and present in kind of like how the transition happened. And maybe I'll wait for another video to talk about like how I got into it. So yeah, that night I was like, let's just go find a dumpster. And sure enough, and I was just like, oh, but I don't want to drive around. Like, the dump is closed. And so, you know, I was saying to Aaron, it's like dark by this point because it's like November. And he's like, well, how about we'll just drive to the closest convenience store, which was like 10 minutes away. And I'm like, oh yeah, like they have a dumpster there. Like, we'll go there. If they're closed, like we'll just go to the dump tomorrow. And sure enough, we get there, it's raining, it's dark, and like they have dumpsters, but they're all locked up. And sure enough, we pull in and the guy from the convenience store is like walking toward there, like a couple feet away, about to go unlock the dumpster. And I'm like, okay. So we go and we're like, hey, we need to get rid of some stuff. Can we throw some stuff in this dumpster? And we're like kind of, even though this is like a really intense emotional experience for me, we're kind of laughing because it's like, we probably look so sketchy. And the guy was like, okay. So anyway, so then yeah, we just like chucked all of this stuff in the dumpster. Basically, like the next day I went through like all of my crystals, like any jewelry, like any like remnants of stuff that I still had. And then, yeah, I took it and threw it in the dumpster. And like I had this like Ouija board that I had been carrying around since I was a kid that like one of my like childhood best friends made for me. So there was like this emotional kind of tie to it. I talked to her. I was like, I don't know, I feel so weird like getting rid of it. She's like, are you kidding me? I don't even know why you still had that. Get rid of it, burn it, throw it in the trash. And it was wild because she was the first person, we hadn't talked in ages, and she was the first person for some reason I felt called to tell about my being saved. And she's like, this is so wild. Like just like within the last couple days, I heard such a clear, audible message that was like, the answers you're looking for are in the Bible. Like she had just had that shift, and then I was reaching out to her. So it's been really cool. We've been on this journey together. That was basically this whole November 4th kind of awakening, being saved experience. It was super interesting because I'm like, okay, I guess like who am I now? And now that I'm not going to like manifest what I want, like if the Bible is true, if what this says is true, like I really truly want to see what does the God of the Bible have in store for my life. And that was like so freeing and liberating and letting go of control of all of these things. And like within less than a year, so many of my dreams have come true. I moved to a new city, like the city that I really wanted to move to for like a year leading up to that I couldn't seem to like get out of this old place, and I really wanted to move closer to the ocean. I'm a block from the ocean now. People showing up to like provide houses and places, and like friends showing up, and just like letting all of these occult practices go. And I was always like really good at like manifesting houses. Like that was kind of my superpower. And so I really wanted to see if that was still available. Like I really want to see like, yeah, what are my spiritual gifts that are of God of the Bible, not what I'm like trying to develop and get better at. I really wanted to see that. And I'm still in the process of seeing that. And my housing gift is very much still present, which is beautiful to see. So that is, yeah, a gift from God, not something that I just like developed in the new age. Yeah, and me and Aaron started a church, a biker church, which is incredible, which has been like a dream for like probably half of my life. I remember getting a vision when I was like in my late teens, early 20s, knowing like the man I am meant to do life with, we're going to be starting a church together. We're going to be doing ministry together. We're going to be traveling together. This was well before I was ever a Christian, but I always knew my future husband, I was meant to travel and do ministry and start an alternative type of church with him. And that has come to fruition, which is like so incredible and so beautiful and so much cooler than I could have ever imagined. And it's a biker church. So it's just like so fun and so cool. And yeah, he does the sermons, and it's just like, I'm so inspired. And it's just incredible to see this community that has come into form in our local community, just to see what God is doing and bringing all of these like incredible, super cool bikers together who've never felt really comfortable at regular churches, but are very much seeking the Lord. And people like myself too, women like myself who were in the new age and have come out of it. And so it's been really cool to see how this community has evolved. We also got engaged, which is really exciting, and are going to be getting married pretty soon. And so all of this to say, it was worth it. And I'm almost coming up, I guess like this November will be a year since I was saved, and not manifesting anything and not trying to control anything, and truly being in prayer and devotion to the Bible and like the God of the Bible, not some, personalized version of God I made up, or some mishmash of God of all these other cultures. It's like, no, like I really want to know the truth of the God of the Bible and see what fruit shows up in my life, and not just doing it for the fruit, but like that this actually does feel like the truth. Like how is that all these other things are completely relevant to my life, and like all of the, like I said, all of the red flags I was seeing in this like spiritual industry and culture, it's all in the Bible, which is just incredible. And how the people of those days were going through the same thing. And so it just shows us that like scripture is timeless. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Like his word does not change. And so like not to trust anybody that comes in with some new doctrine, you know, changing his wording. It's like, no, the answers we can find are in here. And I'll just leave you with this for now, because if you have an experimental kind of approach like I did, one of the things that really got to me as a truth seeker, a searcher, constantly like going down the path of like the secret knowledge and curiosity of like all these other things. When I looked at my bookshelf, you know, on this final sort of day of having all of these books and realizing I've spent so many years reading all these other books. Like I read every day. Like I love reading. I love researching. I love, you know, learning about life and reality and like searching for like why we exist. And like, I've always asked all those big questions of life, right? What would happen if I just devoted all of that reading to the Bible, even for 1 year? Like, what if I truly just studied the Bible, this one book, for 1 year, instead of reading all of these other esoteric books? And that got me really curious. And so I'm almost at a year. And what I will say is that the Bible is like real food. And once I started reading the Bible, it was like everything else I had ever read was like empty calories. It was as if I was raised on like eating McDonald's every single day, and I never even actually knew what real food was until I tasted it. And then I started like having real food and really feeling nourished. And so I'm gonna leave you with that. Thank you for watching and listening. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to like leave them below. If you've been experiencing this yourself or just really seeing the red flags or the holes in the spiritual community and wanting a way out, there is, and it's called Jesus. He is God, and his answers and his truth and the truth, a truth that we can actually build on, is in the Bible. I'll leave you with that. Talk to you soon. Bye.